Yo, what is up guys, this is Tyrannic Swine here and welcome to another game review. This time I am going to be doing Call of Duty WW2, the 14th main installment in the Call of Duty franchise, and after almost 10 years, it's the first Call of Duty to go back to World War II. The campaign is set during the final year of the war as you follow a group of Americans consisting of Daniel, Zussman, Pearson, Turner, Stiles, and Aiello as they push the Germans back into the fatherland. Now, the fact that you follow the Americans mainly throughout the story in this game is a little bit disappointing, as the fact that what made the earlier Call of Duty games set in World War II really good was the fact that you had different fronts consisting of the different nationalities that were part of the war, and the fact that you only concentrate on the Americans during the final year of the war is something that's already been done plenty of times already in this era, and it would have been nice to have seen something a little bit different that was during World War II, but I mean, like the Pacific era, for example, and that was only done once, and that was in World at War. There was a lot of places that could have been done there that we haven't been to yet that could have been done in this game, but sadly they had to go down the route that they would normally take. However, this is probably the first Call of Duty since Black Ops 2 where I actually find the characters somewhat likable, or at least not forgettable immediately, as the story does remind me of as a sort of Band of Brothers type fashion with these characters, which was nice to see. At least you have some chemistry with them. I mean, the game is a bit too comedic in some cases if you compare it to World at War, which really did show how brutal World War II was, but this game does have a bit of that during the second half, which does put the stakes up a little bit more for the player, especially considering the character that you play actually has something worth fighting for back home where they come from. Although the whole thing about Daniel's brother just doesn't mix well with the story and just doesn't sit well with me. I just didn't really get what was going on in that area. Also, the fact that only one of the characters that you see in this game actually dies, so compared to other Call of Duty games who actually who've killed off multiple characters, even Call of Duty 3 has done this especially, it's not too sad when you see one of these characters die, especially if it's only one of them. The way the characters act is actually okay. I mean, each of the characters has a specific role within the group. Daniels is the main character, Zussman is his best friend, Aiello and Stiles are pretty much the comedians of the group, and Pearson and Turner are pretty much the veterans who've been fighting since the Americans joined the war, and obviously have their moments of conflict with each other, which obviously gets higher and higher as the campaign progresses. But they're the only ones who, well, they're not the only ones who have conflict with each other, but I feel like most of the time there's a lot of comedic moments within this group, and the conflict within them doesn't really start to appear until you get like midway through the second half, like when you reach the Death Factory mission. The game, I feel like the way the characters are, it's alright, but I just feel like they could have tried to make him a bit more down to earth instead of really comedic, because World at War really definitely nailed the way the characters would have acted in a warlike situation. This, I mean, it works for the earlier missions, but when you get to like Aachen and beyond, it definitely wouldn't have. But yeah, the characters did their job. And not only that, the characters in this game also play a role when it comes to the gameplay itself. They act as your squad mates, giving you specific supplies like extra health, extra ammunition, and even like extra grenades and some other things along the way, which will definitely help you because the game does try to make an effort with making the campaign challenging. This time you only have a limited health and have to use health kits to give yourself more health when you're damaged a bit too much, which hasn't been seen since the very early Call of Duty games, and it's nice to see this return, and it does, well, it is a little bit of a nostalgic thing to see. But the thing is, I do like how they split up the squad a bit too in between missions. Like, you're not always going to have the same squad members with you, and you're going to have to really think about what you're going to need when you have only a specific amount of teammates with you, as you'll probably end up with like the worst ones who only reveal the enemy's positions or give you like like grenades, which aren't always necessary. But I like how they've done this with the squad mates. Like they've given them a much bigger role instead of just being invincible cannon fodder for you to use against the enemy. This time they actually play a proper role, and they even added in a mechanic where you can actually save like AI soldiers who have been wounded and you can drag them into cover. Now I'm not sure if this is like scripted or anything, because they always seem like they're scripted in the same place. But it is an interesting mechanic and makes it a little bit more realistic, as that's what would happen instead of them just getting shot once and then dying so you can pick up their ammo. Moving on, this does bring me to the levels themselves. Now this is probably one of the first Call of Duties I've seen for a very good long time that actually has some nice variety to its levels. And yeah, there is some, I mean, the recreations of the famous battles you've seen in the final year of the war, like D-Day, Aachen, the liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, and the fight across the Rhine. These were all decent levels. They're all done nicely detailed, although they don't feel memorable. They feel very forgettable. And the fact that the D-Day mission just literally feels like a rip-off of Saving Private Ryan, the way it plays out is literally the same. I mean, that's probably the way it would have been, but the way it replicates some things feel a bit too similar to the film. And that isn't the first time the game does that. It does it a few other times. It does that in the Battle of the Bulge, where there is a tank literally coming at you and all you have left is a pistol and you just start shooting until you run out of ammo. Literally the end of the film, and that's in there. It does take quite a few things, this game, from Saving Private Ryan and a few other war films. It's not the first time, but it doesn't do it very subtly in this one. That being said though, at least there is nice variety within the levels. So you do have moments where you're in a tank, you're in a plane, there's multiple sections where you're on an anti-aircraft turret, which is actually kind of nice to see. And there's even an entire mission, or well, most of the mission, where you play as a French resistance fighter and infiltrate a German headquarters so you can plant some bombs so you can help the Americans liberate Paris. That was probably the most interesting section of the campaign, and it was actually a very nice thing to see, and like a little bit different from all the shooting and the fighting. For once, you're actually doing some espionage stuff that was actually a part of World War II. So it's actually nice to see that they're actually trying a little bit in this campaign for once to make it a little bit different. Hell, there's even a moment where you're in a basement trying to save a German kid from being spotted by the German army, and whew, it's a little bit suspenseful, but I felt like the bit where the teddy gets caught in the door and like the Germans don't even notice until the last second, a little bit stupid and scripted, but I can see how the situation would have been, and I felt like it was the way it ends, the way the Aachen mission ends, is a little bit sad too, to see that everything you do and someone ends up dying. But yeah, that's just the way war is. But at least they actually tried with things that happened within the missions instead of in between all the shooting and everything. However, a lot of these levels are ruined by the fact that this is Call of Duty, and Activision loves to have his Michael Bay moments of just having sections of the game or cutscenes, just huge explosions everywhere, and it's just ridiculous. Hell, there's so many moments with a character you play what should have ended up dying but doesn't, by just sheer luck, and it's ridiculous by some of the moments that I've seen. You wouldn't see that shit happen. I mean, I don't think we've probably heard a veteran ever speak about going through shit like this. They might have done, who knows, but I don't think to this scale of ridiculousness. However, I have to admit though that this is the first Call of Duty game set in World War II that actually shows the Holocaust, and none of the other Call of Duties set in World War II have done this, not even World at War. Sure, that shows how brutal war is, but it never actually shows anything within the Holocaust, even though it's set during the final years of the war when the Americans and the Russians would have been finding these sort of places. Although, even though you're looking for the camp, there's not a lot. It would have been more cool if it was like what happened in Band of Brothers, where you actually find a camp full of like surviving prisoners, and instead of it just being empty and you just see a few dead bodies. That I feel like the payoff would have been so much better, but the fact that you just look around an empty camp and take a few pictures is a little bit lackluster. But at least we actually get to see the Holocaust being seen and shown to us in a Call of Duty game for the first time. Moving on to other mechanics that are within the campaign, there is a lot of special sections that I already said, like the plane, the tank, and there's even a few bits where you're like driving cars and stuff like that and jeeps. But the thing is, even though you do these things, they're a bit disappointed by the fact that they were on rails. You don't have much freedom of movement to do these things. You have to like go from A to B with them, and that's it. I mean, the plane one is probably the most free one you can move around about with. But even then, when you're fighting enemy fighters, you pretty much like do this sort of like original Star Wars Battlefront 2 lock-on thing, and then you do this sort of very fast zooming thing where you follow them. It kind of sucks that when you see a game like Battlefield 1 do aerial combat much better than a game that apparently has more money and shit like that. But it's just, wow, it's kind of, like I said, very on rails. Each of these sections in early Call of Duty games would have been freedom of exploration to do, yet in this, you're very compact and don't have much to do. Although I will admit the enemy AI in this game are kind of brutal. They are a lot tougher compared to their earlier World War II counterparts. Even though we are fighting the Germans once more for the millionth time, they are quite tough to take down. They'll take a few hits before they go down, and yes, there is a lot of them to fight at times, and trust me, they're a bit tough to take down, especially when they start throwing a few grenades and start shooting Panzerschrecks at you. Yeah, you'll definitely go down quite easily. But even though you have limited health, it isn't too difficult to the point where it's annoying. I haven't attempted the game on Veteran yet. I don't know if I ever will, mainly because I just don't have that much interest anymore in playing the Call of Duty games on Veteran. But I feel like this could be a pretty tough game on Veteran. But the fact that there's only 11 missions and most of them are pretty short, I'm not sure about that. Another thing that actually kind of impressed me was the graphics themselves. Now, the Call of Duty games haven't been the best looking games for a good while now. A lot of games have definitely put their effort into making their characters and levels look great, whereas Call of Duty has been lacking for a good few years. However, Call of Duty World War II finally feels like it's picked up the slack and actually looks pretty damn nice. The detailing of the levels, the weapons, the characters themselves, and the cutscenes, they all look pretty damn good. This is probably the best looking Call of Duty to date that I've seen. But even then, older Call of Duty still look better in some ways. But hell, at least the graphics are a nice improvement for once. And the soundtrack, it's okay, but it's very forgettable and actually kind of sounds a bit samey. A lot of the sounds just don't go for me, and just, yeah, it's very forgettable as a soundtrack. Now, before we move on to the multiplayer, since there's actually quite a bit to talk about there, I'm going to be talking about the Zombies game mode. And even though I thought Black Ops 3 Zombies was bad because it looked like a bloody hentai come to life, World War II Zombies is very, very boring. It's very lackluster. It's just another Zombies game mode, to be honest. That's it. You have 4 different characters, although I will admit one of them does consist of David Tennant, which is quite nice to see, but that's pretty much the only good thing. Hell, the zombies themselves are boring to fight, especially considering you also have like these new variations I haven't seen before, but the whole story and everything, and going around doing objectives while getting weapons, perks, and a new thing where you have armor and stuff, it's just, it doesn't interest me anymore. It's just bland and just doesn't have anything there, unlike the other Call of Duty games that had much funner zombie game modes. And yeah, there's just too much shit in this. It's like you have consumables, which I don't give 2 damns about. You have classes, you have like weapon kits, mods. They don't do anything for me. It's like they're trying to put too much into the zombies game mode and nothing has come out of it. This is probably the most disappointing game mode, zombie game mode I've ever seen in a Call of Duty game. I mean, I haven't tried Advanced Warfare or Infinite Warfare, mainly because I don't give two shits. But yeah, it's the zombies game mode in this was just agonizingly boring as hell. Now let's talk about the multiplayer. Now, the last Call of Duty I played was Black Ops 3. I missed out on Infinite Warfare because I didn't give two shits about going back into the future, and I will admit it was nice to feel having boots on the ground for once. No jetpacks, none of that futuristic shit, it's all just classic World War II stuff. And for the most part, the gameplay actually does feel pretty good. The loadout system is a little bit different compared to previous Call of Duty games. The way they've done it is actually kind of interesting. They've now split each of the loadouts into divisions, like airborne, infantry, armored, mountaineer, expeditionary, and there has been 2 more that have been added on as time has gone on. But I do like how this makes each class a little bit different. It gives them a bit of variety to choose which one to go on whenever you play a match. Each of them have different sort of little perks that you can when you level up your division over time when you use them. Although perks are no longer a thing when it comes to actually like customizing your classes. Instead, it's called basic training, and you can only have one of these. And each of them pretty much work like perks from other Call of Duty games are just being given a different name. Each of the guns within the game itself are really decent, they're very fun to use, and the attachments themselves, even though there's a lot of attachments, only a few actually show up on the gun. Some attachments won't show up whatsoever, which I'll admit is kind of weird in some cases, but it works. It doesn't mean your gun will look over the top as hell and full of attachments, which is necessary for the World War II setting, and that's what I liked about that too. Each of the weapons, like I said, they do work well, and it all depends on how you use them, what maps you use them for, and pretty much everything. I liked the weapons and the fact that you can finally use certain ones that you haven't used before in any of the World War II games, and so yeah, the weapons were actually nice and decent to use for once. Although, what does disappoint me a little bit is the fact that when this game came out, there was a lot of lacking of quantity when it comes to the weapons and the maps themselves, as I'll explain later. There was not a lot of weapons to go around, as even though the game has put more weapons in over time, when the game first came out, there was a lot of lacking of like weapons being around, and it was probably even less than what it was in World at War, and that's a game that came out like 9 years before this. So the fact that they had less weapons than a previous Call of Duty game set in the same era is pretty damn disappointing. And what also confused me a little, and I didn't say this in the campaign, is the fact that the enemies use Russian weapons for some reason, which doesn't make any sense since you're fighting on the Western Front and not the Eastern Front. It would have made sense there, but it doesn't make any sense here. And it was like also Japanese weaponry too, which feels sort of annoying as hell when the fact that you don't even go to the Pacific theater whatsoever, and yet you have Japanese weaponry. It's like rubbing the salt in the wound a little bit more, just irritates us. But yeah, at least the weapons you have were okay, it's just the fact that there's quite a lack of it. You have your usual grenades and tactical grenades to help out in certain situations, and instead of kill streaks, you now have score streaks which work pretty much with the scoring system. And there is also customization within the game too, but the customization is really poor and lacking as well, just like the weaponry, as there's like specific stuff, like you have different names for the airborne, the infantry and all that for your classes, but it's just the fact that most of them are like the same clothing but different colors. That is very poor and very lacking of effort for customization. I mean, freaking Call of Duty Black Ops had more effort with its customization than this. The fact is, it's made even worse by the fact that that this stuff is unlocked by supply packs, and obviously we all know that this is microtransactions, and it is absolutely annoying to see this shit. And I mean, you do have orders which are there to help you out, which are a nice way of bypassing the microtransactions, but it's just the fact that they're there. Like, the quartermaster is basically your microtransaction asshole that's in the game. And yes, I mean, there's the orders, and you have your weekly, daily, and your special orders, but we all know people are going to go for the quartermaster and buying supply packs by the dozen, and it's especially when there's like a sale on special ones, and yeah, it's just, why is this shit a thing? I mean, yes, this was 2017 when microtransactions were shit hot, but this is always a pain of a thing to see no matter what. Moving on to the maps and levels, I mean, they're designed pretty nicely, well, detailed nicely. The design is pretty much all the same. You pretty much have like 3 ways to go through the left, right, or the middle, and that's pretty much it. Each of the maps work pretty much all the same with that sort of direction, and there's only 9 maps. That is incredibly lacking of quantity for a game when it first comes out. I mean, the original World at War game had 16 or was it 13 original maps when it came out. It was one of those 2 numbers, but it was still more. And and the loading, the connection time and everything trying to load into the game is also very poor too. The multiplayer, despite having been enjoyable to play, really doesn't do well when it comes to quantity and even quality of certain things. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with the multiplayer despite it being somewhat enjoyable with the way it feels. Luckily, there is a lot of game modes within the game itself, like a lot of the returning game modes we usually see, like Team Deathmatch, Domination, Search and Destroy, Capture the Flag, all those sort of things, Free-for-all, we have all of them, but there's also a few new things in here, I think, unless they're being taken from somewhere else, but War is a new game mode that feels like a smaller toned down version of Conquest from Battlefield 1, or Operation, that's what I mean, Conquest. It feels like a toned down version of that, but it works. It's actually a very enjoyable game mode, although these all have their own separate maps to use. So there is like specific maps, which I think there's like 3. Yes, there's 3. So that means there's like 12 maps overall, but these are only specific to War, so it means you have to go on a specific game mode just to play on them. But whatever, at least War is actually pretty enjoyable with like both sides having to do like objectives, like the attacking side has to go through certain phases while the opposing side has to defend them. Pretty much defend on a certain time limit unless they get their ass kicked. And yes, you can have a bad match, you can have a good match. It's not very easy to exploit certain things within the game. Well, it can be, but it can't be. As long as you have a good team, you're fine. But I do like how these game modes are. They do work okay, especially the War one. I did like the War game mode, despite it being sort of a smaller rip-off of Operations from Battlefield 1. But it works. I actually was okay with the situations that they did. And they also have another game mode called Gridiron, which is basically, well, rugby in Call of Duty. That's pretty much it. Didn't play it often. I played it only like once or twice and didn't give a damn about it. But hell, it's something for you to play. And also there is something called Party Games, which was game modes added in later on, but they're all pretty much stuff taken from other games. Like you have Infected taken from Halo, you have Prop Hunt, obviously taken from Gmod. But yeah, those were okay. I tried them out, but yeah, the game modes was solid enough to be enjoyable. And one last thing to talk about when it comes to multiplayer is the fact that the game decides to take something from Destiny, which is the little headquarters area, which is a nice little free roaming area for the players to have a look around, where they can get like orders, the quartermaster shit, where they can access zombies, where you can just like talk to the general so you can prestige yourself. There's a nice few things you can do around here, and it's hell, I'm surprised that you can actually do more in this, as in Destiny's like home area, you can't do shit apart from going around to shop vendors. In this you can actually do a few other things. You have a nice little firing range where you can like test out your weapon and your marksman skills, which is actually kind of nice. You have a little tower where you can test out the score streaks, where you can learn how effective they can be, and so you can use them in the multiplayer. And there's even a nice little 1v1 pit area, and this is probably one of the most enjoyable things the game adds in, as we haven't had 1v1 since like COD 4 or something like that. And yeah, it's actually very enjoyable. You can choose specific weaponry you can fight against with the opposing player, and yeah, the headquarters area is actually a nice little area to be in. And there's a lot of hilarious glitches you can use too there. I mean, some of them were pretty damn funny, and luckily none of them have been taken out as far as I know, but some of my favorites are still in, luckily. So overall, Call of Duty World War II is a bit of a mixed bag. A little bit more positive compared to earlier, previous Call of Duties like Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, but it still has a lot of mistakes that are there because of Activision, and it still just stinks of corporate greed. But at least there is some enjoyment to it. There was a lot more effort into the campaign than usual. The multiplayer can be a little bit enjoyable, but it still has a huge shit ton of mistakes there. And the zombie game mode is just there. It's just a boring addition to the game that I just have no interest in anymore. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give Call of Duty World War II. So, that is my review of Call of Duty World War II. Leave a like on the video, comment on what you think of the game, comment what other games you want me to do. If you have any ideas, subscribe, share the video on social media, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.